Hey friends, we all know how powerful it can be to hear stories of people who have taken their pain and partnered with God to find new purpose in it. That's why we do what we do and why we share these stories on the podcast week after week. Now, I want to personally invite you to be a part of sharing the story that started it all here at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. On July 30th, I'm launching my book, Nothing is Wasted, a true story of hope, forgiveness, and finding purpose in pain. It's a story of finding hope after devastating loss and how God uses our greatest pain to show us His redemptive purposes for us. In it, you'll learn more about my late wife, Amanda, her life, her legacy, and even how in her death, God is using her life to point people to Him. We need your help stewarding this story by bringing it to your friends, families, churches, and circles of influence, which is why we are asking you, our faithful listeners, to be a part of our book launch team. Now, as a part of the book launch team, you'll have access to read the complete book manuscript prior to the July 30th release date. You'll be able to join me for an exclusive virtual book club this spring and summer. You'll also be eligible for special prizes throughout your time on the launch team, as well as access to all the pre-order bonuses that we have for you. Now, to be a part of helping us get the Nothing is Wasted book launched into the world, all you have to do is pre-order a copy of the book when it's available beginning April 1st, and then fill out the form on nothingiswastedbook.com with your pre-order confirmation number. You'll then receive an invite into our exclusive book launch team group. We know this story is going to impact so many people who are hurting and looking for hope in their own pain. Thank you for being a part of all that we do here at Nothing is Wasted and for joining us on this journey.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Aubrey Sampson, and joining me is your other host, Davey Blackburn. Hey Davey.
Hello, hello. How are you, Aubrey? Good to see you too. It's great to be on here with you. Great to be with you guys every week. I love being able to do this.
It's amazing.
Where we bring another story of God's powerful redemption, healing in the midst of our greatest pain that we go through.
Oh, yeah, it's so good.
That's the Nothing is Wasted podcast.
It is. It's a Nothing is Wasted ethos. I love it.
That's right.
We are joined by an incredible guest today, Nick Connolly. Davey, tell us a little bit about Nick and his story.
Yeah, Nick's story is really incredible. In fact, we talk a lot about this book, Don't Give Up Just Yet. And it's very ironic. And so I'm going to give the listener just a little bit of preface. We had to record this interview in two different occasions, two different takes, because there was all kinds of resistance coming at us when we were trying to record this. Nick's internet went down and some just crazy stuff took place, like stuff that never happens. And it was funny because we're talking about resistance when we're trying to do something for God's kingdom and how to persist. In fact, the byline of his book is Choosing Persistence in a World of Overwhelming Resistance. And I'm like, couldn't be more appropriate for this conversation. So you may be able to know. I mean, I actually address it in the conversation, but you'll be able to maybe pick up where we lost it and where we had to go back. And So Nick is the husband of well-known author Jess Connelly.
Jess Connolly, she's amazing.
And so it was really great to have. We've never had a conversation with Jess, not up to this point, but it was great to have a conversation on the other side of things with, as he would say, the less better half. But I mean, he was pretty awesome too. So I'm excited for you guys to listen to this conversation.
Going to be such a good one. Hey, this is an exciting time in the life and ministry of Nothing is Wasted because the Nothing is Wasted book is officially on Amazon.
That's right.
It's a real book now, but it's only available to pre-order. It's coming out very soon.
That's right.
But we want to invite you to pre-order. We want to invite you to be on the launch team. The launch team is actually really special because as a launch team member, you get to read the manuscript before everyone else. You get some freebies, some time with Davey. You get to be part of a book club. You can also go, if you pre-order it, there's also lots of freebies. So here's what we want you to do. Go to nothingiswastedbook.com, nothingiswastedbook.com, and, all the things. You can do all the things there.
That's right.
From pre-ordering to joining the launch team to just finding out more, spreading the word. And we're very excited. We're celebrating here.
And
there's
by
a
this
big
point,
event too.
I know. By this point, you will probably have information up on that site where you can find out about the launch event taking place right here in Indianapolis. August 1st is the official date for that launch event. And little rumors, I'm not sure, but I heard that you're your podcast hosts, both of us, might be present for
might
that. We'll
be
see.
there.
We've got
We
lots
might.
of surprises, lots of special guests that we are going to be welcoming. It's going to be an exciting event.
It's going to be a great event. We would love to have you join us. Again, go to nothingiswastedbook.com. All right, Davey, should we take a listen to your conversation with Nick Connolly?
Let's do it.
Well, Nick, man, it's so great to have you joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is incredible.
Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, not just because of the topic of the conversation that we're having, but also because there's a natural affinity here. You're a pastor. You live in the beautiful state of South Carolina, which I'm always trying to figure out how in the world I can get back to South Carolina. But man,
Awesome.
I'm so glad that we can have this convo. Would you tell us just a little bit for our community who may not be familiar with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you've just shared some of this book on your wife's podcast. Your wife has a very prominent podcast. She's a prominent author as well. So many people might be familiar with her, but tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, she is the better story. And so if you're familiar with her, she's got the better story and she's the better half. But
We all
I've been
feel that
married
way though, man. About our own spouses.
Exactly.
We're like, man, I don't think I'd be here if it wasn't for her.
Absolutely times 10. I'm married
Yeah.
up. We've been married for about 18 years and we have 4 kids and we're really navigating this new territory called teenager and preteen life. And it has been wild. And so we've got a 17-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And so they keep us busy. And when we're not busy with them, Jess and I pastor a church here in Charleston, South Carolina called Bright City Church. And we've been going for about 10 years. And Jess runs an incredible business called Go and Tell Gals. And she trains women from all over the world on how to fulfill their calling and ministry wherever God's placed them. So that would be businesses, writing, ministry, you name it. She tries to equip these women to run where they are. We kind of call her the midwife of mission. So if you've got a dream that needs birthing, she's your girl.
Wow. That's a great visual, man. I've never heard that. Never thought of that. The midwife of mission. I love
That's
that.
her.
I love that.
That's her.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, you've just written this book recently, Don't Give Up Just Yet. And the subtitle is Choosing Persistence in a World of Overwhelming Resistance. I love the title of this because, unbeknownst to our listeners, or if you're watching this on YouTube, right before this, we experienced quite a bit of resistance from a technological standpoint. I don't think that that's a coincidence whatsoever.
Not at all. Not at all.
I believe wholeheartedly that what you are sharing in this book and what you're going to be talking about with us is such an important part of our understanding on how to be resilient, combat the enemy's resistance in our lives as we're trying to step into what God's called us to do. Now, you wrote this because you experienced some of it yourself. I'd love for you to share a little bit of your own journey through this that caused some of this message to be birthed in you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the message of persistence and the problem of persistence, even though I'm a pastor, one of the things I've learned is that this is the universal thing. Like this is the universal pain point. Like in this world, as Jesus says in John 16:33, he says, in this world we will have troubles. And so there is resistance everywhere. And so even though I am a pastor, I'm writing just from the human experience of what happens when you encounter pain and when you encounter hardships in this world. And what do you do? Because I noticed in my life early on that I didn't persist and I didn't press on. And as a result, I felt like I missed some of the fruit and the harvest that was on the other side of those opportunities. And so I talk about that openly. I also just talk about my, growing up with a single mom, and she had cancer most of my childhood, and just some things that happened over the course of my life. And, we can't choose what happens to us, but, one of the things I've learned is that we can choose how we respond to what happens to us. And so I just process those things in the book. My story, one of the things I talk about in the book is, the goal of life is not to compare pain. Like this isn't a contest, and I don't think anybody wants to
Okay.
enter that contest. Like,
No.
it's
No.
not the contest we're signing up for. But my heart is that I would be able to come alongside people and compassionately triage their souls for the fight that they're currently in. Like people are fighting for their lives in this world. I mean, even in your Nothing is Wasted
Yeah.
community, like you know people who are in the fight of their lives,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of times the world or culture comes at things and says, "Hey, you need to suck it up or crush it or do more or try harder," and I don't. That's not the gospel. That's not the message of Jesus. And so, in the book, I just talk about the things that I've encountered, some of the things that I've learned in the midst of that pain, and just how to process it and not ignore it, but also how to, come out the other side of it.
Mm, mm. Well, the reason I love that you're writing about this, you've written about this, you're talking about this, is because you sit in a unique seat, right? As a pastor, you're watching other people face that
Hmm.
kind of resistance, and on lots of different fronts, right? There are so many different
Yeah.
types of resistance that we can face. Some of it self-induced, some of it totally out of our control, some of it because there's a spiritual attack on our lives, some of it because we just
Hmm.
live in a fallen and broken world. I mean, there are so many different avenues that where resistance can come at us, and I'm sure it has caused you to have this holy discontent when you see people stall out or get stuck or completely derail in their faith and in the purpose that God has for them. But then also you've experienced some of it yourself too, and you're going,
Hmm.
hey, I can look back in my own life and see where I wanted to give up and didn't and saw fruit from that, but then other places where I did kind of throw in the towel or got really close and I missed out on that. I'd love for you to share, because especially recently when it comes to pastors, ministry leaders, but really all of us,
Yeah.
right? Coming in the wake of the pandemic, the political, like there's so much going on in the world. It feels like an added layer of resistance we're all experiencing.
Yes.
So what was that like for you personally?
Yeah.
What kinds of things did you wrestle through that maybe gave you a little bit more insight or empathy for the people that you've been pastoring too that have experienced that?
Mm. So one of the first passages I preached on for our church, it was actually at our first public gathering, was Mark 2. And Mark 2 shares the story about how the four guys are carrying this guy to Jesus and they're trying to get him into the house. They're trying to
Mhm.
get this guy before Jesus. And, they were having no luck. The house was full. And so they carry this guy to the roof and tear the roof off and lower him to Jesus. And, one of the things I've always felt like, at least my personal, I don't know if you would call it like a purpose or mission, but I just feel like, I think a lot of times, especially when you were describing in the current political and
Mm.
social context that we're in now, um, a lot of people are quick to throw darts or, condemn or, I just always felt like, I think this world is full of a bunch of hurt people. And as you've heard before, and I know others have heard, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And so and hurt people want to give up. And so I just was like, man, I just want to be the companion that comes alongside them and just like
Mm.
whispers in their ear to like keep going. And so when I'm pastoring people, when I'm seeing things, obviously I see my life, I see things that I've gone through. And, one of the things I love about Jesus was there was just a compassionate curiosity when he
Mm.
interacted with people. Is it was never here's what you should do and here's how you should do it. And here's the 5 different ways to grow your platform. And if like, he never came at it, like he saw people and he was like, hey, let me ask some questions. Let's arrive somewhere together. And so, I just have a special place for the person on the mat. But just recently, I had encountered something I had never encountered before. One of the most beautiful things about this book is it's been a process. I started this process in 2018. I
Mm.
was finally able to begin the process in 2020, and then it took 4
Wow.
years to craft this message. And in that, when you're writing the book called "Don't Give Up Just Yet," you're like, okay, so that the pain and the the problems and all that. That's in the past. Now it's time for me to like run, sprint, like let's head to the finish line. And then on November
Yes.
17th and November 24th, I suffered 2 panic attacks that sent me to the hospital. And at the time, I didn't know they were panic attacks. And so, what I thought that it was heart things. You try to do all the right things, you try to eat all the right things, you try to exercise. And I was like, what is happening? What is going on? And so once I realized that they were panic attacks, it led to about 10 to 12 nights where I didn't sleep. And it was the most intense spiritual attack I had ever had. And so I remember just not sleeping and being in those nights. And I was like, God, the message is already done. The book is already done. Like things like that was the past. And let's move into the prosperity of the future. And, God was like, hey, the problem of wanting to give up never passes. And so I say all that to say is I have compassion for the person on the mat because I see in my own life where I'm the guy on the mat and I'm the one being carried to Jesus. And so even in the last few months, I've just seen our faith community just rally around me in ways that I never thought were possible. Like the pastor's supposed to be the one that cares for the people. And in this last season, the people have cared for the pastor.
Wow.
And so it just feels like I have so much compassion for the person on the mat because I'm like, slide over, move over, make room because I'm on the mat too.
Wow, man, that's so good. It can be difficult. Like I love the fact that you brought up this idea of a spiritual attack because it's something that in certain seasons, my family and I have felt with, some seasons it's felt lighter, some seasons it's felt more with more ferocity. Right. And it seems like in this season in particular, full disclosure, it is coming full force. I mean, it's for like every direction and you're going, so I'm sitting here in the middle of it going, man, how do we navigate this? I'm sure there's so many other people who are experiencing the same thing. And then you always have this thing in the back of your mind that says, well, I know I can tell the one-to-one correlation. We're full throttle on helping people heal and find freedom and do ministry, and God's opening so many doors, but at the same time, the enemy's coming in really strong with attack to try to discourage me or to thwart, get us stalled out.
Oh yeah.
So maybe the easy solution would be to throttle back and just like, you know what? I don't know if this is worth it. Right.
Yeah.
That can sometimes you can feel like you want to pull the ripcord and just, and find an escape route on that. How do you, when you find yourself in the midst of that attack? I mean, it's one thing to go persist, like when you've done everything to stand, and it's like this rallying thing. And I'm like, that's great. That's scripture. But how do we actually do that? How do we resist in the midst, or how do we persist in the midst of that resistance?
That's a great question. I don't know if you feel this way, but a lot of times when I'm in those seasons, it takes me a second to catch up to what's actually happening because I think my mind is so practical and literal. I'm like, okay, well, that's happening, and this is happening, and I can fix that, and then I can fix that, and then that's just dumb. That shouldn't have happened. Like, I think practically, and it takes me a while to think spiritually. And so I think the first thing I would say is number one, think spiritually. Number one, put on the spiritual goggles, like those. Have you seen the clips with, at the time of we're recording this, the new Apple, whatever that vision thing is that has come out and people are obsessed with that thing. And you watch people out in public do this thing and it looks silly. And I think sometimes we think it's silly to put on the spiritual goggles. And I think it is so crucial to step into those spiritual eyes and say, okay, this is not practical. This is spiritual. The second thing I would say is another thing that I'm famous for is getting offended in the midst of attack or offended in the midst of the storm. And I become offended at God. And I'm like, God, how could you? Why would you ever? And, recently God's been bringing me back to James 1, where it says, consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, where you face trials and of many kinds, knowing that the testing of your faith is actually accomplishing something. And the other day I was reading it and I stopped at brothers and sisters. And I just started thinking, I was like, man, because we are a part, if we are by faith believing in Jesus, we are a part of the right family of God. And because we're a part of the family of God, we have an incredible target on our back. And so on one hand, I could be really offended by that, but on the other hand, I could say, you know what? Like, he has called me into the kingdom of light. He has called me out of darkness and into marvelous
Mm,
light. And so I live in the kingdom of light. And so I
yeah.
don't need to be surprised by this. I don't need to be offended by this. Like, it actually should encourage me, because sometimes when hard stuff is happening, we doubt whether God loves us. We doubt whether God
Yeah.
sees us. We doubt whether God's with us. And, you know, I don't know if I'm sure the enemy hates this, but anytime I face spiritual attack, I see it as the absolute confirmation that I'm heading in the right direction. So Satan's like, hey, I want to convince you to give up. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, you just ruined it, because I actually am knowing that I'm heading in the right direction. And this is what God's called me
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
And so, you know, once I look past the offense, then it's like, okay, if I'm heading in the right direction, there's got to be some incredible reaping on the other side of this, which is Galatians 6:9.
Right.
It says, let us not give up in doing good, because in due time we'll reap a harvest. And so, you know,
That's right.
what I love about your story and your ministry is that you have that tagline is that God is wasting nothing. And the only way
That's
we
right.
see what's ahead is if we just one foot in front of the other. So do I want to quit?
Yeah.
Absolutely, all the time. It never takes the desire away. Sometimes do I have to change pace? Like, okay, this is attack.
Mm,
Like, maybe I need to slow down. Like when I had the panic attacks and the sleepless nights, it was like, okay, there's a pace thing that needs to happen. But at the end of it all, I'm always going to take and put one step in front of the other one.
wow. Wow. Man, that's so good. I love the differentiation there between, you know, it is like, okay, what is this panic attack, for instance? What are these kind of
Hmm.
outer manifestations of, you know, anxiety or stress or whatever? What is that
Oh yeah.
telling me? How is God trying to speak to me and guide me and lead me through that about my pacing, and at the same time not giving up? Because I think we can fall into
Hmm.
some different ditches where we can be like, no, we're just gonna push through and we're gonna crush it, you know, and it's like no days off, and you're like, well, that's not, I don't think that's God's way. You know, Sabbath is good too, right? That's what, but like, you know, on the other side of things, we can pull back completely because we're scared or we're frustrated or we're discouraged or we're exhausted, fatigued. You know, it's like, well, I just need to, and we get sidelined and then we get stuck being sidelined. Well, okay, if you're watching this or if you're listening to this, actually, if you're listening to this, you probably won't know the difference. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're absolutely going to know the difference, because Nick and I are dressed differently than what we were at the beginning of this conversation. He's in a different location.
Oh yeah.
My lighting's slightly different because it's darker. It's raining outside, so I don't have like a nice
Oh
big
gosh.
natural light glow going. So it feels a little bit darker in here. So you're gonna have a little. It's a little bit jarring. And here's the thing. Here's what happened. In the middle of recording this, we recorded this last week. Is that right, Nick? At the time that was it a week
Yeah.
ago? Okay,
Yeah.
we were recording, and we got about 15, 16, maybe 18 minutes into it, and it just everything. Nick's internet just went out like kaputs. Done.
Done.
And so we're like, oh man, we've got to schedule another time and finish this conversation. And I think that illustrates the point that we're talking about in this, that there's going to be, when you take up the invitation from the Lord to go on the front lines in ministry and carrying the message and the cause of Christ, you're going to experience resistance. And sometimes that resistance comes in the mode of discouragement. Sometimes it comes in the mode of actual, you know, temptation or, you know, some kind of spiritual warfare. Sometimes it comes in the mode of technological difficulties. And that was the case for us.
It was. It was, but we're good today. We're believing for a miracle.
So we're back at it, and we're going to be continuing this conversation about resistance. Here's the thing, Nick, and I think this is a perfect dovetail into this question. Sometimes we can experience resistance and we're like, okay, we've got to, as we talked about before, we got to persist in the resistance. Sometimes that resistance can be an actual indication that you need to stop, or that maybe your assignment's being changed or something, you know. So it's kind of a twofold question. How do you discern whether or not this is like okay, hold on, maybe God's kind of pausing us or impeding our progress, so to speak, for a reason, or this is just resistance from the enemy? How do we discern that, and how do we adjust based on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there was a few things that have happened in our lives that we had to figure out this dance with God. And, one of the most interesting things I think about God is that, for us as humans, we're so focused on the what, and we're so focused on the destination, and we're so focused on all the things that we long for, which are incredible and wonderful things most of the time in our hearts and in our lives. But God is so focused on who we are becoming. And so he's focused on the preparation of who I am so that I can carry out the purposes that he has for me. And so for us, I've noticed a few times, like for example, when we were trying to start the church in Boston, Massachusetts, and we wanted so desperately to go where churches are needed. And we were like, man, we just want to be in the Northeast. We want to be a light, a city on a hill. And so we had the place picked out, and 3 times we tried to do the church in Charlestown, Massachusetts. And 3 times it just was not working out. And when we were going through that process, we stepped back and we paused and we said, God, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Why isn't this happening? So we're asking all the questions. And one of the things I felt like God was teaching us in that time is that the right thing at the wrong time is still the wrong thing. And so for us, the desire to begin a faith community was the right thing. Was it the right time? It wasn't. We were not in any shape or form ready to lead a people. We were hurt. We were broken. We just needed a lot more preparation. And so in that, God delayed the dream, but also he pivoted us to where we did that. And so sometimes, the timing of it all it's hard to discern. All of this is so hard to discern, but I think sometimes God's trying to work those things out in us before he does something through us. And then the other thing I would say is, a lot of times we find ourselves in really harmful, traumatic and toxic situations. And I think sometimes, you and I have spent some time in the church world. I think sometimes people use the gospel to guilt people in to staying longer than they should.
Yeah.
In some circumstances. And sometimes there are things that are happening to you that are really to the detrimental of your health and abundance, and actually pausing, pivoting, and or maybe turning and not running the other way, but just going the other way is actually what's going to be necessary for your total persistence in life.
Wow.
Because, it's just the one thing that we're focused on, but God's focused on the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And so I would say if anything's robbing the abundance that Jesus Christ purchased for you on the cross, then that's a red light. That's a warning light. You've got to step back and say, hey, is this environment causing me to live out the life that God's purchased for me?
Wow.
And, again, I wrote a whole chapter on this in the book. I actually start the book on not giving up with when should you give up? And, the great theologian Kenny Rogers, like he said it best, like you've got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away. And, that's a beautiful dance between, you and God.
Yeah.
But it's just so great because God's so concerned about the relationship. And he's more concerned about who we are and less concerned about what we're doing and where we end up. Like he's just so fixed on who we are as people.
That's so good. That's so good. The past few years, there's been, you could almost call it like a collective discouragement in a lot of ways. I think, the pandemic really catalyzed some of this or accelerated it. Maybe some stuff that was already there, latent in so many different people's lives that had not been dealt with. It was brought to the surface. I saw it across the board with pastors that we work with, churches that we work with. Everybody collectively, pastors were saying the same thing. They were overwhelmed. You kind of had things stacking up on top of each other where pastors, especially leaders, felt like they just weren't going to be able to, it didn't matter what decision they made, they weren't going to win, so to speak. both
Yeah.
with the pandemic, some of the racial conversations, the political climate, all that stuff all kind of just like smashed into itself. And then on the coattails of that, we have this collective conversation about deconstruction and deconstructing our faith and people walking away from the faith and walking away from church. And so I'm curious because I would love to hear your perspective as a pastor, as someone who is, also encouraging other pastors, leading other pastors on some level. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how maybe someone who's just listening to this, they're, a lay person, they attend a church, they're involved in their church, but they're not really sure what their pastor's feeling right now. The difficulty that leading in this season right now is, how discouraging that can be. Can you give us a little bit of a window into that?
Hey friends, I know that so many of you listening to this are carrying a heavy weight of pain and loss. When we start to process what's happened in our lives, we often find ourselves paralyzed by the pain and not really knowing where to go from here. We even begin to hear or tell ourselves lies like, this is the end of our story, this will define you. And trust me, I've been there. But with the help of others, I was able to navigate my way out of that valley. And at Nothing is Wasted, we exist to help you navigate your pain and even find purpose in that pain. So if you are new to our community and wondering where to start, or if you've been with us for some time and you're just looking to take the next step, we're hosting a free live call just for you. In it, we're going to talk about 5 steps to taking back your story, no matter what you've gone through. In this call, our founder, Davey Blackburn, will share more of his story, and he's going to teach you 5 critical steps you'll have to take to rewrite your own story. This call is 60 minutes long, but I promise you it will be well worth your time, because in it you will learn how to regain a sense of agency and begin thriving, not just surviving in the midst of trying circumstances. Why having more questions than answers may be an essential part of moving forward. How to get rid of the overwhelming negative emotions that tend to bog you down and get you stuck. The one keystone decision that will help you get out of your pain. How to listen to the right voices when everyone seems to have an opinion on what you should do next, and a ton more. If you are feeling weighed down or paralyzed by the pain you've experienced, you don't have to stay there. And Davey will be your guide and show you the way back to thriving. Go to nothingiswasted.com/start here to sign up for this free live call, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, just click the link in the show notes. We've made it extremely easy to sign up, and we're offering multiple dates and time options for you for this live call to work with your calendar. I believe this one step could be the very breakthrough you need to put you on the redemptive path God has for you. Open the browser on your phone right now and go to nothingiswasted.com/start here, or just click the link we've included in the show notes of this episode. We are in your corner, and we can't wait to connect with you soon.
Hey, Pastor, are you looking for a resource that will help you minister to people walking through the valleys of pain, whether it be from a loss, a childhood trauma, sexual betrayal, divorce, or anything that has brought incredible suffering and hurt into the lives of your congregants? I know the needs are immense in the church that you serve, and it can be debilitating to even know where to begin. What if I told you that there was a proven path, a roadmap of sorts to help walk your people through whatever pain point they are experiencing and into greater freedom, healing, and purpose? The Nothing is Wasted Pain to Purpose course is just that. We designed it for individuals and churches who are ready to engage their stories of pain so that they can experience healing and hope as they move forward. We know churches across the country who have used this tool and have seen incredible life change in not only individuals, but the overall health of their church. Listen to Pastor Kenneth Wagner of United Church in Delaware share what a difference Pain to Purpose has made at his church.
I tell you, since we launched Pain to Purpose 3 years ago, it has been so impactful in our congregation. Now over 100 people have completed Pain to Purpose. Maybe you're lead pastor and you're thinking like, man, I love this idea, but like I just feel like that I'm not sure if this is for me. My encouragement would be literally to find something. And I've searched far and wide, and Pain to Purpose is the best thing that I have found to help my people walk a journey of turning their pain and finding purpose from their pain.
So if you're looking for tools you need to help people move from pain into purpose, we have what you've been looking for. Simply go to nothingiswasted.com/churches. Again, that's nothingiswasted.com/churches. It'll be right here in the show notes. It'll also be right here if you're watching on YouTube.
to learn more and join churches all over the country that are bringing healing in a practical, biblical, trauma-informed way to those within their walls. nothingiswasted.com/churches.
Yeah, I think, every leadership opportunity is discouraging. Like it just is. Like, I don't care. You could be leading a cat to get inside of a house and it would be a discouraging process. Like getting things and people to go to places and to step into purposes that are beyond themselves is just a really hard process. And, we're all familiar with this part of scripture. Most of us are familiar with it, but the Joshua 1, like, I just think that's why, like,
Wow.
God made it clear, like, hey, you are about to step into an impossible position. And I just want to let you know that, like, you're going to be discouraged, but have courage. Like, you're going to want to give up, but, like, keep going. You're going to feel very weak, but I want you to be strong and courageous.
Wow.
And you're going to feel alone, but I want you to know that I'm with you.
Yeah.
And even more than that, Joshua was succeeding someone in leadership. And so that, anyone who's doing succession in leadership is just so hard. It comes with its own challenges. And so I think for all of us, whether in leadership or not in leadership in your following, like, all of it is really hard and discouraging. Like, it's a really tough process. And so just speaking from, a pastor's perspective, I think, first, there's, like, the discouragement that you have sometimes between myself and God, where I'm like, Jess, my wife, always says this about me, is she says, I always see what isn't earthly possible and what hasn't yet happened. And so to live in that reality a lot of time is very discouraging, because I see what could be.
Right.
Like, I see what the future is, but not yet has become. And so I have to live in that now and not yet reality of walking that out. Is like, I want to be somewhere, but I'm actually right here and at B, but I want to be at Z, which is, a human thing. And so I think there's that part of the discouragement. And then there's the discouragement that, a leader or a pastor could have for the people. Because, I think when our church was first starting, if I just could be honest, is I was discouraged that people weren't doing the things or showing up or, for God's sake, responding to Planning Center. I feel like if you haven't lived until you've got a Planning Center request or jumped on Planning Center, and that's all good and fine. But I feel like now more of my discouragements revolving around people or in the midst of people just revolve around just wanting, like, so much good for them and just seeing them war through life and just seeing them walking through the impossible circumstances and still trying to serve Jesus. And so, with pastoral leadership and any leadership, you're just carrying multiple burdens because you are essentially doing multiple jobs. Like I talk in the book, like, to be a pastor is, you have to have, like, the, like, sayings and the wit of Ted Lasso with, like, a Fortune 500 CEO mindset, and also be able to be a TED Talk speaker every week. And that's just the, like, top 3 things that I can think of.
Right.
And so I think, there's the pressure that I put on myself, and then there's the pressure of the job. And so I guess all that to say is, we all have pressures, but I do think sometimes pastoral ministry, because it involves souls, is a little different.
That's so good. Yeah, there's a lot of expectations that over the past, I don't know, decades, centuries, has been placed on pastors, and I think part of what this season is doing is stripping away some of those expectations, which is good, but it doesn't come without a whole lot of pain.
Yes, amen.
And it's good that we move away from or gravitate away from heralding this one man who leads us into the promised land, so to speak, and we shift to, no, we're all, there's a priesthood of all believers. We're all ministers of the gospel here. We're all taking part in moving forward the kingdom. And we don't need to put our hope in one man other than the man of Jesus.
Yeah, that's so good.
So,
And I think we all like going back to what you were just saying is like we're all a part of this thing. I just feel like anytime I'm in a situation like that, not only is it like really good for the leader's soul, I think it's like good for the people's soul, like the followers.
yep.
Like we're all out here on these streets giving it our best and trying to do the will of God. And you know, when we're in that place, it's just such a beautiful, powerful picture
Yeah.
of what's possible in the kingdom.
Man, well, to that end, I mean, maybe talk about the role that isolation plays in discouragement and not being able to find or muster up the strength to persist. You know, that's
Oh,
one of the
man.
enemy's biggest ploys.
Bro, Satan loves a solo Christian. Like I talk about it all the time with our people is like, I think sometimes we just want to be like a ninja and we come into church and we like hear the sermon and we drop the smoke bomb and we leave and it's like, okay, I got my fix. But you know, I mean, there's so many analogies with that of being a solo believer and a solo Christian and how the roaring lion himself comes to like take you out because he sees that you're solo. But you know, when I think about withdrawal and needing to disengage, I always think about Elijah.
Mm,
Like he was that guy that saw, like not only did he see the hand of God in an incredible way, he was responsible for how it happened. Like
yeah.
he prayed and then there was no rain, and then he prayed and then there was rain, and then
Right.
he had like a dance off battle with the like false prophets at the time, and like God's fire came down from heaven to light the sacrifice, and so or light the altar, and so it's so interesting how you can see the hand of God in such a powerful way,
Mm,
yet you still sometimes enter into these moments where you withdraw and you isolate yourself and you don't want to see anyone and you don't want to be around anyone.
right.
And so, you know, in the following chapters, Elijah, you know, he's running from everything. He's out in the middle of nowhere and he's like, just end it all now. And, you know, that's a little bit more of a sped up progression than maybe some of us feel like, you know,
Right.
maybe that takes like 6 months or a year. But I think sometimes in our lives, like we all wrestle with that, um, the feelings of isolation and
Yeah.
the feelings of discouragement. And, you know, recently having, not had any anxiety and, having battled some panic attacks that just came out of nowhere. Like I loved my alone time. Like I just loved it. Like I recharged from being an introvert. And, you know, I went from this place of just having no fear. And if I'm alone, I'm fine with it. If people are around, I'm also fine with it. Um, but having been on this side of it, you know, it really has left me in a place where I'm like, man, I can't withdraw. Like I can't isolate because that's what the enemy wants. And I think he will capitalize on that isolation if I isolate myself.
Wow.
And in the midst of when the panic attacks were happening, like I couldn't be left alone. Like I was just there was this uncontrollable, like non-realistic panic that set in my soul. And I was like, I just need people around right now. I just need people around right now. And, you know, having come out on the other side of it, I really talked to God about that. And I was like, hey, I don't want to like lose that, the healthy part of that. Like,
Right.
I want to be able to be good at being alone with you, but I don't want to lose that hunger for having people around me. And I felt like God gave me that picture of Mark 2 where the four guys are carrying the guy to Jesus and tearing the roof off to get this person before Jesus. Yeah. I feel like at this time in my life, I'm the guy on the mat. Like in all the other years, I'm helping carry people to Jesus. But right now I just feel like a guy who's on the mat, and, you know, people have graciously agreed to help carry me to Jesus. And I don't know. I've just found such a beauty in not being isolated.
Yeah.
And it's so scary to get over the fear of that and the vulnerability of that. But, you know, as Paul says in is it Corinthians 12:9, it's like when we step into that vulnerability and that willingness to be weak, we experience God's power. And I just have experienced his power in a new way when it comes to the community of God and the people around me.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. Yeah, I mean, I think especially for a leader, it is unnerving to think about letting down your guard or, you know, becoming vulnerable, especially since you're supposed to be the one that quote unquote has it all together, or everybody looks to you for the answers. You know, surely in the midst of all of that too, you have to be pretty selective and choosy with whom you're vulnerable with. You know, it's not like we can just talk about this with everybody, but also
Yeah.
we can't not have people in our lives. Maybe how do we discern that? Because if that seems like such a huge antidote to discouragement, is community, is doing this together, having people you can reach out to and say, hey, I need you to help me in this and carry me in this. How do we discern who those people should be?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. My wife, Jess Connelly, has like an incredible phrase that she always says in relation to this that she got from someone else, but essentially I'm butchering it hardcore, but we'll go for it. Is it that you want to be real and authentic with everyone, but you really do want to be vulnerable with a few people. And so like, who am I? Like everyone should see who I am.
Yep.
Like there shouldn't be some sort of hidden thing in my life and in my heart. I shouldn't be leaning into that. I've seen a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome and how like sometimes we change who we are based off of where we are. And I just am a firm believer that everyone needs to see who you truly are, because the world's going to be a better place. Like everyone needs to see who you uniquely have been created to be. But then on the other side of that is everyone, you need some people in your life. Everyone needs some people in their life to be vulnerable with. And just even from a marriage perspective, I have just seen, like, I think a lot of times, I hope this is not, you can cut it, edit, whatever you need to do. But like, I see so many people talking about like sexual intimacy from the physical side. And I'm like, man, no one's talking about the physical intimacy that comes from the spiritual and the emotional intimacy that you have with that person. And so the willingness to be known fully by your partner or spouse only leads to greater intimacy in the holistic marriage. And then, you know, with the people that are in my life that are close to me, like I'm always looking for safe people. Like I think it took a long time for me to learn who safe people truly are. That doesn't mean that they agree with you all the time. It doesn't mean that they tell you everything that you want to hear. I mean, they're just safe. Like like what you say stays with them. They love you no matter what. And so I'm always looking for safe people. And then I'm also looking for people who practice mutuality. And I think a lot of times we get into relationships and you're like, okay, I'm the only one saying anything here. Like I'm the only one sharing my heart. I'm the only one going deep. And they're like, okay, yeah, tell me more. Or, you know, and so I'm always looking for someone who's going deep with me and is willing to dive into the deep end with me. And so I think, you know, when you find those people, you know, you tend to want to do everything you can to not keep them in your life, but have them in your life in a healthy way to where you're able to experience the intimacy that God intended for us to have on this planet. And I think sometimes intimacy and connection goes wrong because we either try it with the wrong people or try it in a way that's just not meant to be. And so we get burned and we're like, well, I'm never doing that again. And in the book, man, I talk a lot about rejection and how the rejection of my youth led into, you know, like it just felt like somebody ripped the scab off when I was in ministry, of how I was still operating out of that wound of being rejected. And, you know, a lot of times when we flow from a spirit of rejection, our natural defense is to reject people before they can reject us. And I just was like the president of that club. Like I was like, vote for me. Like I'm here to, and I just felt like God just showed me how I was being and then delivered me from it in a powerful way. And so it was a process, and it is a process.
Man. You know, I love the subtitle of the book. Obviously the book's called Don't Give Up Just Yet, but choosing persistence in a world of overwhelming resistance. And inherent within that subtitle is this idea that the world seems to be always going to be overwhelming with resistance.
Yeah.
What kind of encouragement can we derive from that, right? Like, because we had a conversation my wife and I did the other day with some pastors. We were talking about spiritual warfare. We were talking about resistance. We were talking about just like, it's like, man, at one wave after the other. And it seems like the more that you're putting forward in terms of quote unquote kingdom effort, like, hey, you know, it just ramps up even more. And I'll never forget my wife asking this pastor at one point, going, does it ever let up? And he was just like, nope, not if you're staying on the front lines.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, because that could discourage us. It could cause us to be fearful, right? It could cause you, even if you're not a leader or a pastor, but you're experiencing spiritual momentum in your life, you're going to experience a little bit of this resistance. But I'm curious, how do we not let that, you know, I know this kind of a big, almost like taken back and a summation of how do we not let that discourage us, but how do we actually derive encouragement from this that's going to give us that extra supernatural, you know, oomph that we need to move through it?
No, that's a great question. Going back to, you know, Jesus's words, because I always feel like he says it better. He says, John 16:33, he says, in this world you will have troubles. And so to me, that's like that word resistance. Like, we're going to have resistance. But then he says, the second half of that, take heart, I have overcome this world. And so one of the encouragements that I take when I face resistance is that somewhere in this pile of resistance poop, is what we'll call it, there is a miracle. Like, there is a miracle, a battle, a victory, an outcome that God has for me that he wants to show me.
Yeah.
And so, you know, even Romans 8, it just talks about that victory that we have in him. When things are against us, he is for us.
Right.
And so, and then he lists off all the things. He's like, hey, all these elements of resistance, I'm confident that none of them are going to be able to withstand the ways that I am for you and working through you. And so I always look at resistance as just the opportunity to see some sort of miracle, some sort of hand of God. And, you know, one of the things I noticed early on in my life, I had like 20,000 jobs, like from 20 to 30. Like, I was working everywhere. And what I noticed in myself is that when things got tough, I got going. And I was like, I don't want to work anymore. And so I'd go find another job. And, you know, what I noticed is that the things that I didn't like followed me. And then eventually what I realized is they followed me because I was the problem. It was me.
Wow.
And so in that, if we stay, you know, we're seeing these miracles and our faith is strengthened. And I think a lot of times people have a lack of faith or a faith crisis because they haven't seen the hand of God move in their own life.
True. Yeah.
And so it just is like, man, if you could just remain just a little bit longer, like I think this is going to be for your faith.
Wow.
The second thing that I think resistance does, at least in my heart, is it allows me to, it almost is the confirmation that I'm heading in the right direction. Like, it is the affirmation that I need that I'm heading in the right direction. Because when you read the scriptures are so clear that when you become one with Christ, like, the enemy hates that. And so he's going to do everything he can to keep you from being who God's created you to be and doing the things that God's created you to do on this earth. And so a lot of times I see resistance and I'm like, man, this is just incredible, because I was doubting whether God loved me or not. Now I know, like, he's in my corner. Like, he is with me and he's for me. And then the second thing that I was doubting is I was really doubting whether I'm heading in the right direction on this thing that God's asked me to do. But man, I can just tell by the amount of resistance that I'm experiencing that the enemy does not want me to go that way. I'm going to go that way. I'm going to see what's happening.
Wow. Wow. That's so good. I love even just the little, like, kind of pinpoint of grace that comes through, like that silver lining that goes, okay, if I'm experiencing resistance, here's all these things that's telling me that seems counterintuitive. One of which, like, here, there's a miracle, there's fruit that's going to come out of this resistance. It reminds me, of John 15, where Jesus says, I'm the vine, you're the branches. If you remain in me, you will bear much fruit, but apart from me, you can do nothing. And I think so often we don't remain, we don't stay. And then Galatians 6:9 says that do not grow weary in well-doing, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest. There's a promise. You will reap a harvest if you do not give up.
Amen.
And it's so helpful to remember, okay, we're going to just stand in the midst of this. When you've done everything, as Ephesians 6, when you've done everything to stand. And it's
preach.
it can be so difficult. Nick, we were out at Napa Valley several years ago and talking to a sommelier, and it was the first time I'd been to Napa. I thought I was very confused because I thought that the soil in all the vineyards was going to be like luscious and looking like fertile, rich, dark soil, but it was all very arid. It was dry and like crackly. And I asked him about that. I was like, is it a drought here? Like, oh no, that's like, this is how it always is, And I said, well, how do these vines grow? I mean, I wouldn't think that they would be able to grow like that. And he said, oh no, that's the best fruit comes from the most arid soil. And he said, he looked at me, he goes, because the vine has to struggle. And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And if we remain in the midst of the struggle, then we bear much fruit, is what John 15:5 is telling us. And that's that's the message you're carrying, man. It's like, okay, let's not grow weary in well-doing, because we're going to reap a harvest. We are God's people. We're his children. He's promised us this. Nick, as we close, I'd love for you to tell us just what is your hope for this book? It's now out into the world. You just were telling me you were at a conference where all these pastors were receiving this. There's people all over the world who are going to experience this message. It's such a timely message. Don't give up just yet. What is your hope for it?
Yeah, my hope is that people experience the harvest that God has for them. And so just going back to that Galatians 6:9, I mean, that is the message of the book is like, hey, that there is a fruit, there is a harvest on the other side of these hard trials. And the world and the culture and the prince of the world and the prince of the culture has done everything he can to cause you to buy into a gospel of ease, a gospel of comfort, and a gospel of convenience. But there is a kingdom, there is a power, there is a force at work that is contrary to that. And what happens is we start to feel almost like we're crazy. Like this can't be right. Like, the world's doing this, and so on Instagram has this following and that life and this, all the things going for them. And so I want to squelch all of that. And I want to say, hey, what does God have for your life? Like, what is the harvest and the bountiful fruit that he has for you? Like, what are the purposes and the dreams? And I want to see, your listeners and the people who read this book, I want to see them make it to the harvest. Yeah. Like, I want them to be able to reap what they've sown. And the only way I know to do that is to encourage them to keep going. So, spoiler alert, man, that's the book. I want to help people keep going.
Good. So good. Well, man, thank you. Thank you for not giving up on this. My gosh.
Yeah, absolutely. It was such a joy and an honor to be on this podcast and a part of this community where, this is the front lines of where people are experiencing the resistance. And I just love your heart and the heart of the community that's saying, hey, nothing is going to be wasted. Right. Like, we're not letting the enemy make the hardest days be the final days. True. And that we're going to press on and find the victory and find the harvest and find all the things that God has for us. And so I love this community.
So good. So good. Well, thank you so much. Where can we follow you? Where can we tap into more of what you're doing? Obviously, we'll put links where everybody can pick up the book right here in the show notes, right underneath the YouTube. We want to put some other links there where people can follow you.
Instagram's great, in Connelly, and then nickconnolly.co on the website. And those are where I wish I had a better social media prowess. Like, I wish I could get up on TikTok and do some dances and like do all the things, but I know my place in this world, and
You
it
know what?
is
You got to just live. You got to
Instagram.
be you, man. You got to be you. I'm not about to get up on
Do you,
TikTok and do dances. That's for sure.
exactly. Do you remember the movie Hitch with Will Smith,
Yes.
Kevin
Just stay right
James?
here.
All right, and yeah, I'm 6 inches. I'm staying here. That's where God's called me, and so I know my limitations.
I love it. I love it. Well, man, thanks for spending time with us. This has been awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, what'd you think about that, Aubrey?
I mean, I love Jess Connolly, but now I'm a Nick Connolly fan too. Yeah, I mean, I know you said this before, and you said it again in the conversation, but I did appreciate that it was like the medium was the message. Like you literally had to persist through resistance to make this podcast happen.
That's right.
So thanks to both of you guys for persisting, so we could hear that message and that download from the
I told
Lord.
Nick, I said, we are not going to give up on this one. We can't.
You
How
can't.
can you?
Absolutely. Like you got to, bro, this is your thing. You got to do this. That was really good. Davey, I want to hear from you. Like choosing persistence in overwhelming resistance. You've had a lot of resistance, obviously.
Yeah.
Is there a time you can think of when you were like, I'm persisting?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can think of some times where I was like, okay, I feel like I'm ready to tap out, and then, you know what, I'm just going to keep persisting. I remember back in 2013, my late wife Amanda and I left for vacation. We had planted the church. It wasn't growing quite at the rate that we thought it was going to. We had a pretty solid core team at the time, but just for whatever reason, over the course of a month, and this was like in probably February, March of 2013, over the course of a month, we had several families who left the church, and it wasn't for bad reasons. It was like a move or a life change situation or something where we couldn't cite like, oh, we had done something wrong or oh, they left but it was like we did everything right, and then here's this little small core group of people of us planting the church, and it just dwindled. And we left that May to go on vacation, and we literally did not think we were going to go back to Indianapolis. We did not think we were going to continue the church. We were just like, we're so exhausted. We're so done after 2 years of trying to build this thing, getting kind of that hope of like, okay, it's starting to surge a little bit, and then boom, taking that hit. And it was so defeating. But I'll never forget, while we're on vacation, just the Lord really meeting us in some powerful ways together to re-energize us, to give us a little bit of that, no, we're going to go back in and we're going to just put our hand to the plow and trust that God is going to do something in this. And so that's one of my things I think back to a lot, because we did see growth after that. We did see some incredible life change after that. We did see so much transformation. I go back to it and I go, okay, remember this idea of Galatians 6:9, that the only people that do not see a harvest are the people who give up.
That's so true. Wow.
In due time, we will see a harvest if we do not give up. That's the condition on that promise. If we do not give up. And so I always kind of go back to that and go, God, you were faithful then, and I know you're going to be faithful now.
You're going to be faithful now, and I'm not going to give up. I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. I think about, I can think of a few examples of this. This is true, but I would say like more metaphorical at the same time. I just feel like giving birth, like you, as a woman, like there is nothing like persisting.
Oh my goodness, I can't even imagine.
You know what I mean? And I know for some of our listeners, you've lost a baby, you haven't been able to have a baby, but even you know what it is to persist for the dream, right? Or persist through the heartache, or persist through the actual labor, and then what's on the other side of that. I mean, there's so much resistance, right? And even as I'm thinking about my oldest going to school in like a year and a half, it is weird to think about persisting in motherhood all these years and like what God's going to do, and then how that applies so much to ministry, how that applies to even our grief, even our walks with the Lord. Like, I love that you said I'm going to put my hand to the plow, because I do think there's so much messaging out there about giving up. Some of it's healthy. Slow down, have rhythms of rest. Don't be a workaholic. So don't hear me say not that. I think yes, that. But also sometimes to me that can creep into, I'm not going to put my hand to the plow. I'm going to walk away. Yeah. And I do think the Lord is, looking for people of faithfulness who are like, look, I'm not a flight risk. I'm here, Jesus, no matter the resistance. And and I'm gonna give birth. You know what I mean? I'm gonna labor until I see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And so I appreciate that message from Nick. I appreciate God does honor, I think, those who stay faithful, of course, with his help and his strength and his spirit doing it. But I do think God honors those of us who are like, no, my hand is to the plow. I'm moving on. I'm forward, you know?
So good, Aubrey. It's so important. What an important message in a time where we have so many options, where we, you know, if one thing doesn't work, we can be tempted to, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this.
Yeah.
And in a time where it seems like success is viral, overnight, microwave.
Totally.
And that's what is purported to us.
Yeah.
And that's really not the case. I love what Dave Ramsey said. Like, every overnight success story is 20 years in the making.
Totally. 100%.
And you're like,
100%.
yes, absolutely. And so that's a really, really important message to help recalibrate those of us who have gotten kind of inoculated by this whole idea that like things should go quickly at our pace, and it just doesn't. It just doesn't. God's pace is slow. That's why Jesus' metaphors, most of them were agricultural.
Yeah.
This is a slow growth thing. That is the pace of God. And then it's like slow, boom. You know, it's crazy how that goes. So
totally.
Do not give up.
That's right. Don't give up.
Well doing.
Hey, we're passionate about that here at Nothing is Wasted, and that's part of why we do something called 5 Steps to Taking Back Your Story. It's a Zoom call every month, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much
you can find out more about that at nothingiswasted.com/start here. And that's also like kind of an entry point if you've been listening to the podcast or following us online and you just want to know more, like how can I be a part of this ministry? How can I partner with God to take back my story? We want to invite you again to nothingiswasted.com/start here.
That's right. That's right. We also want to thank Sleeping at Last. I'm going to thank Sleeping at Last
this
time because last time I left him out.
How dare you?
We want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Make sure you go and download and stream his music anywhere you can download and stream music. And while you're at it, follow us on Instagram at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. Follow me at Davey Blackburn. You can follow Aubrey at ObSamp. And we would love for you to rate and review the podcast.
Yes.
And subscribe on YouTube. Just let us know how this is impacting you. In fact, we have almost turned over 1,000 reviews on Apple Podcasts. We're at 992 when I checked today.
Come on, you got to get us over that 1,000. We need 8 of you to get on there and do it.
Like 1K or 1.5K on
that'll feel so good.
Apple Podcasts. All the stories that are being shared. God is using this ministry to impact your life. Next week, we have an incredible conversation, actually, with several of our certified coaches.
I am so pumped about this.
I cannot wait for you guys to hear about this because we made some big shifts, some big transitions when it comes to our certified coaching, and we've enhanced it quite a bit. So next week, we're going to talk a little bit about that. You're going to hear from several people. And so go ahead and take a listen to this little clip from that episode.
Having somebody who can kind of lock arms with you and walk with you through that journey is so helpful. We do have a tendency to think, I've got this, I'm going to be fine, I'm going to work through this myself. And then hopefully we get to the point that we realize we need help, because it's very difficult to navigate something that big by yourself. So I think it's so important that, you know, we kind of have this processing model that we go through with trauma or tragedy. And when we really understand we need to seek help is a big step for us, right? People struggle to really go, I feel like I need help. But that, you know, the importance of that, it helps us through our confusion because we have somebody who can kind of challenge us and ask us questions to kind of challenge our thought process. And it's necessary for us to heal because we can get trapped in our own head and in our own thoughts and in our own beliefs. So having someone who can challenge us and kind of walk us through that can be incredibly helpful.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.